This episode is sponsored by iFoster. If you're listening to this podcast, we assume you care deeply about improving the foster care system. Last year, more than 2,400 youth, caregivers, and frontline workers from across the nation took the time to tell iFoster what's needed to improve foster care in this country. Their voices are being heard, and now it's your turn. Please join this year's Voice of the Community survey, available online now at voiceoffostercare.org. That's voiceoffostercare.org.
Hello and welcome to the Imprint Weekly Podcast. I'm John Kelly, senior editor of the Imprint, a daily news site covering child welfare and youth justice around the country. You can read all of our coverage at imprintnews.org or check us out on Facebook or Twitter at the Imprint News. You can also sign up on our homepage for our free weekly and monthly newsletters. And for professionals in child welfare and youth justice, subscribe to our Youth Services Insider section for a closer look at news on business policy and practice. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is also a member of the SafeCamp Audio Network. You can check out our show page and all of SafeCamp's other great podcasts at safecampaudio.org on the web or at SafeCampAudio on social media. On this week's episode, we are joined by Christopher Baker Scott, founder and executive director of Sun Scholars, Inc., which is an organization that supports Connecticut's foster youth on college campuses. Now, unlike many school-based approaches around the country to support foster youth on college campuses, Sun Scholars is a centrally located organization that serves youth on a number of campuses around the state. And in 2021, Baker Scott joined the Imprint Weekly Podcast to talk about the idea for the organization, which he had really just got off the ground and launched amid COVID. So 5 years later, Baker Scott agreed to come back on with us and just chat about what's gone, what's changed, what he hopes to accomplish in the future as Sun Scholars continues to grow in the state. So without further ado, here is our conversation with Christopher Baker Scott. All right, we are joined today by, for the second time, Chris Baker Scott, who is the founder and executive director of Sun Scholars in Connecticut. We had Chris on along with Lino Martinez about 5 years ago to the day. I think it was January of 2021 when Sun Scholars got launched in earnest. And we'll talk at the top a little bit about what Sun Scholars is. I will drop a link to our interview back then in our show notes for anybody who wants to go back and listen pre-post and see what it was like then versus what we're going to talk about now. But Chris, thanks for jumping on again with me on the Imprint Weekly Podcast.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
House rules on our show. You got to give us a favorite for the people in one of our pop culture categories. Those are TV show and movie, sports team, music group, or book. I went back and listened. Last time you gave us Game of Thrones, which had just ended, or it could have been Lino. I think all three of us talked about it a little bit. So it's got to be something different than that. What do you got for people?
Yeah, of course. My normal go-to is One Piece because I am a huge fan of One Piece. I have a One Piece tattoo sleeve, but currently I would be remiss if I didn't lift up Peaky Blinders because the movie finale is coming out in the week, and I'm very excited for that. And I'm a lifer with watching Peaky Blinders. I think Cillian Murphy is just one of the most incredible actors of our generation. So I'm lifting that up today.
Man, I got to get back into it. I dropped off. They went on a break for what felt like 5 years, and I know it's back, but I haven't gotten back into it. But yeah, excellent show. I am not familiar with One Piece. What's One Piece?
Oh yeah, it's an anime. It's like
okay.
It's a steep climb. It's effectively one of the world's most longest running animes. But what makes it brilliant? So it's technically a pirate adventure, but it's so much more than that. And it follows a Monkey D. Luffy, who's the main character. There's a live action on Netflix as well right now. But basically, he's going out to try to become the king of the pirates, find the world's greatest treasure. But what's so incredible about it is the author, Oda, has woven the story in such a way that pieces that were written 25 years ago are relevant to today. Foreshadowing events from the early 2000s are important for the story as of right now. And it's just, I've never seen a story before so consecutively and consistently write a very linear progression of a story. I would put it in the same category as things like the Count of Monte Cristo, the Odyssey, these very grandiose epics. And I think it's one of the greatest stories ever told in this generation. It's made me a better person. I love it.
Whoa, man, you sold me here. All right.
Yeah.
I wanted to have Chris on to really, I thought it would be cool since he came on 5 years ago when Sun Scholars started to really just reflect back and think about what's changed both in the space that Sun Scholars exists in, which is that kind of crossroads between education and opportunity and youth who have experienced foster care, what has changed in terms of how the organization operates, but then also the world around the organization, which matters just as much. But before we get into any of that, I think let's make sure people know what we're talking about. So why don't you just succinctly describe what Sun Scholars does for its young clientele?
Yeah, of course. So Sun Scholars Inc. is an organization I founded and currently lead. And what Sun Scholars Inc. is about is we work to improve the college and career outcomes of foster and adopted youth by hiring alumni of foster care to carry out mentorship and academic coaching services. So all of our staff that work directly with students, all our full-time staff have lived experience having either grown up in foster care, extended foster care, or adoption. And I am included in that as well. So representation is part of our model. So the way that we carry out our services, our goals, is very much being part of the community that we're serving. And it works from what we've seen the past 5 years and going into the next 5 years. So as we know, national graduation rates of foster and adopted youth sit somewhere presently around 6 to 8%. And we see a graduation rate several times higher than that in the 30 to 40% area. And one of the cool things that we've started measuring, we can get into this, but we know that students that we work with, even those who don't graduate, are better off in life having worked with us than not. They are less likely to go into the foster care to prison pipeline, foster care to homelessness pipeline, and so on. So really our mission is college and career outcomes of 18 to 24-year-olds that grew up in foster care.
I'm actually, see, we're going right off on a tangent. I think the conversation will be fun for that way. But what you just said really is interesting because I think it speaks to something we probably, a lot of us logically default to, which is this, when you spout numbers off about like the outcomes of foster youth who manage to get onto a college campus. Because I think that it's really two issues in this space. There is getting youth to that college, and then there's the getting them to stay there and finish. It feels there's this assumption that for every single person that's in the percentage that don't finish college, it's a failure. And if I'm hearing you right, there's kids who are not in that 30 to 40% who finish that are doing okay. They're doing better, and they're better for having experience for you guys. Is that right? Have you seen kids that you've worked with leave college and say, I just wanted to do this instead? And it's fine.
100,000% all the time. And I think that's, to touch on a few things, yeah, there's access and then there's retention when it comes to college. And we really focus on the retention side. Most of our students are already accepted. And with that, we live in such a metric-oriented society, especially as business culture has fused with college and child welfare culture, like terminology of, I remember when I first walked into a classroom years and years ago and heard a principal referring to students as customers. I'm like, that's some weird language, but it goes, and I say this as someone who has an MBA, it goes into that notion of, hey, yeah, we want to see like 30, 40, 50% outcomes. We want to see people that are doing better several times higher than the national average. But to your point, and I really believe this, college is not the only path to success. I think education in general is the path to success. And whether that's college, apprenticeship, trade, self-learning, as long as you're learning something in this world that's correct, you don't want to learn incorrect information, but as long as you're pursuing knowledge and betterment, you're going to do okay. And we have some of our most successful alumni didn't earn their bachelor's degree. We actually have a student alumni who was struggling in college. And so I paid for a Coursera membership for him. And I said, have fun. And he went on and he just started learning IT, cybersecurity. He started going at it, and he already had a background in some computer science, something he just really loved. And now he runs a whole IT company out in Ohio, extremely successful, doesn't have a bachelor's degree. And I think that's not an oxymoron. College worked for me, and it works for a lot of people. It is tried and true. It's a method that works. But as long as you're doing something, and that's where we try to meet our students at. So if college isn't working for them, hey, if you want this, we'll fight for you, like
Yeah.
tooth and fight for you. But if you want to do something else, we'll fight for you there too. And that's okay.
How do people react when you tell them that your guys' performance is in that 30 to 40% range? Because it strikes me as something that's, if you know this work and you know how challenging it is, that's pretty good. And then there's the other reality that in our world, like we think of things as how close to 100% are you?
Yes.
You know what I mean? And only baseball batting averages are like an exception where everybody gets that, oh, 300 is pretty good. But how do people react to that when you talk about it?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to, I'm so glad you brought that up. It really comes down to like when you're talking to people and you're explaining information, it's almost like you have to teach and converse at the same time as to what that number truly means. Like it has to be unpacked. And which is why I say, hey, we know nationally 6 to 8% are graduating. Used to be 3%. 6 to 8 can't possibly still be acceptable to us. It's progress, but nowhere near where it should be. But the national average of college graduation for the US, like 30% of the US population has a bachelor's degree.
Right.
So say 30 to 40% of our community is earning a bachelor's degree that we're working with actually lines up very nicely with the national average. So that's why we also say 6 to 8 times higher than the national average. So we also can say, hey, like it's not 30% in relation to 100. It's 30 to 40% in relation to what would have been if we had not supported them. And it's hard, especially in our day and age. I remember a year ago when a lot of nonprofits were seeing some cuts and so on. Some of that was coming from, hey, only 20% are completing this program, only 30%. But that doesn't mean it's failing. We have to really unpack like statistics and numbers as human beings. We're not good with. And in general, we're not programmed for it. And so we have to really, whenever we're confronted with a number or a stat, it's important to break it apart, which is also why, not for nothing, we started both because of that and strategically. We're like, hey, we're not counting our work correctly if we're not acknowledging the success rates of those who don't graduate that we work with, which are very high. And I think that's something that we've become mindful of measuring of what happens when our students don't graduate, because it doesn't mean our work was for nothing. And in fact, it really mattered to change the trajectory of those young people's lives as well.
Yeah. What sort of average age and point in the process do you, I'm sure lots of your different cases are unique in terms of like how you've come into your world, but what do you typically find is like the age they are when they become Sun Scholars, and where are they in this process? Are you often encountering them before they have gotten into college or chosen, or more like after the fact?
Yeah, most of the time we're getting people who have at least been accepted. So we don't start working with someone unless they already have their high school diploma. Just that's part of the way our contracting works with the state, the way that we've built our program. All of our young people are 18 to 24.
Okay.
The vast majority of them join us at two critical junctures, either the summer leading up to their freshman year, because we get a referral from their social worker, we get a referral from the student themselves, and they're saying, hey, I know I'm going to be entering this new journey. It'd be really great to have some resources. The second juncture that we get are when you have a sophomore, junior, or who should be sophomore, junior, senior standing, but have really struggled in college. They're well below their attempted completed hours, and they're trying to reorient and get themselves back on track. So those are the two main points. We find that, and this lines up really well with national studies, when our students are able to get through their freshman year and join their sophomore cohort or class in good academic standing, statistically, they're set to graduate. Even if nothing else changed, they're on the path to graduation once they get the first year. So if somebody can earn about 30 college credits and then continuously stand on good academic standing, they're pretty much guaranteed to graduate. So we find that our work really starts to pay off like literally right now. So like this year's freshman cohort, January, February is really when the payoff starts coming out. Like students that have not been having the best attendance rates with us start showing up way more. We start seeing students that struggled in the fall. Those good practices that we've helped convey to them are turning into good habits.
Yeah.
And it's really an exciting time. Like this right now, February, I literally love February because it's when you start seeing everyone start to blossom. Yeah, that's the junk shows.
I guess that intuitively makes sense that the first year performance is highly predictive of 4-year success or 2-year success if you're at community college, because you're showing up on a campus, probably, whether you're just commuting or you're staying there. And you're going to find two things out really quickly. One, how you handle freedom. I remember that being a big problem for myself and a lot of other people. And then the other one is you're going to find out how academically prepared you were for this moment, because I just don't think that's uniform across schools, kids, any of that stuff. You might show up because somebody let you in and I didn't learn any of this. I'm not ready for any of this. I felt that way in math. The way I personally went through high school, I avoided anything I didn't have to do. And then I had math coming up in my face and I was like, oh no.
You and I
Yeah.
both.
Yeah.
100%. And it's such a fun space to work and be serving in community, because let's say you were the best high school student ever. What works in high school is not entirely transferable to what's going to work in college. And so you end up having the quote unquote normal transition of how does somebody go from high school performance to good collegiate outcomes
Yes.
on the other end of it. And on the same note, what's normal for a college student to have to struggle with? That freedom, that partying scene. How are they going to engage in this effectively unrestricted social culture? And then balance that. And you couple that with the fact of the matter is our community comes at this almost always with a background of extreme trauma. And so now you're navigating a lot of mental health, a lot of potential academic areas that are regressive because they may have been behind. And then you layer on all the other crazy stuff today with AI and virtual learning, and you have a fun kind of space to have to navigate. And so a lot of our work, sometimes the people on the outside, they'll hear us and, oh, academic coaching, so tutoring. But where our work really focuses is on intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And how do those outcomes, how do we help somebody hold self accountability? How do we make sure that a young person takes the hour they may spend with us a week and translates that to 100 other productive hours?
So this journey for you has, of 5 years of building this thing up, really has coincided with a ton of life change for you personally, right? I was just thinking of that as like preparing to talk to you. You've gotten married, I think, since this started. You fostered somebody. You became a foster parent. You are a dog dad.
Yeah.
You are like a marathon runner now, which will never understand why people want to do, but you do you, man. Cycling. But I don't even know if I have a question about that. I just think that's, in one way, it's like impressive, but also probably one fuels the other, right? Like you're probably better at one for having the other in terms of personal and professional dynamics in your life like that.
For sure. For sure. I feel like I get to live like a very multifaceted life, because on one end, like I've had this social entrepreneurial journey of building a nonprofit, and how do I scale that? How do I build it? And I think oftentimes this is not singling anybody out. I just think just the normal umbrella of this is when you're working either as an entrepreneur in the private sector, where your main goal is to make money, or social entrepreneurship, which is what I'm in, where your main goal is to make change in the world for others. You really live a lonely lifestyle. You're very like siloed. You're building, you're grinding, that whole hustle world comes out. And I projected a lot of that. And so I'm married. I have a lawn that I have to mow. I've fostered. I have a bunch of pets that I love. I live a very like New England life.
I know what that.
Yeah, as a fellow Connecticut New Englander,
Yeah.
I have a very New England life. And I love that. I love that I get to be in a quote unquote kind of small town world. And it's been interesting because building Sun has always moved forward. I've always poured my soul into it. It's interesting because as the program, as the agency has grown and gone from this sense of infancy to maturity as an organization that's now cleared 5 years, I've also grown. I was, when I started this, I was a raggedy, straight out of college, 21-year-old building, wanting to make a difference. And now I'm 30, going on 31. And yeah, I've built a life. I'm thinking about kids and how I want to build family. And it's been really cool to have both grow alongside each other. And it's such a privilege because I am riddled with ADHD. And I love that I have a life and a job that I get to be so creative in. Every day I get to show up and try new things. And if it doesn't work, then all right, we shift gears. And when it does work, it feels great. And we say, hey, we made a difference through this new idea. So I feel very privileged that in kind of the complex, chaotic world of founding an organization, I've gotten to build something. And I just love that. So it's been a really cool joy. Yeah, that's a good reflection point for sure.
When we talked last, I think you guys are just fresh off getting the first real contract
Yeah.
to do some work. And if I recall correctly, it was a contract from the Department of Children and Families, which is a child welfare agency in Connecticut, to work with about 60 kids. So you were at 300K or so in revenue back then. You're much bigger now. It's, I think, closer to 500K, maybe more. I don't know. What does that translate to in terms of service? How many youth are you working with now every year in terms of like new cohorts?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So where a lot of that new revenue comes in is we actually have two programs now. So we have a
Mm.
main college and career success program that works with about 45 to 60 kids at any given time based on the need and the demand. And that's actually been a very interesting iterative process because we've also taken a second to say, hey, let's really treat in that role the people we hire as part of the program, not just in the sense of representation, but we actually work with our frontline staff and we as fellows now and we say, how do we help you develop? Because the full-time staffers have lived experience, they're coming from this world, and so we want to give them support and say, hey, we know you're not going to be here forever, so what do we want to do to help you build your life? So we offer tuition reimbursement. We very much treat it in almost like an AmeriCorps model. If you don't use your tuition reimbursement today, you have this for the future when you want to go to graduate school. So both of our staffers are pursuing master's degrees right now. And I think that's so cool because they become part of the success outcomes that say, hey, like, not only are we helping these 60 people, we're helping these two people in front of them change the trajectory of their life. So that's been one of the cool iterations and changes on that front. The secondary program that we have comes from a pretty a tragic start. It was the passing of one of our alumni, Robert Dudchick, and his brother Anthony. They both passed away in a no collision car accident.
Oh,
And
man.
yeah, it was awful. It was really awful because when I was starting this, going back to that raggedy 21-year-old that I was, Rob was one of my very first students. He was someone I worked with. He actually did not graduate. He's a good example of someone who was very successful not graduating. He became a flight attendant. He was looking forward to going back to get his teaching English as a second language degree. Very passionate about language and anime and travel. And when he passed, it was rough on us. And I reached out to his parents and I had this idea. I was like, hey, Rob meant a lot to us. And I didn't know Anthony, but in virtue of Rob, I understood how much he meant to Rob and who he was as a person. And I was of the notion of we want to honor them. We want to memorialize here at Sun and create something that, just keeps their name and giving alive. Because Rob was the first person to show up to anything we did, literally the first person. And he was always volunteering. He traveled all over the world. And so we created the Robert and Anthony Dudchick Memorial Fund program, which has raised a lot of grassroots funding. And what we've done is we take a group of students every year, they do a community giving project. And then from that community giving project, we bring them together and take them on a unique trip somewhere. So last year, we brought 20 students to Peru because Rob had gone to Peru in high school, which was amazing.
Very cool.
Yeah. We've brought students. This year, we're bringing a bunch to Acadia National Park. So that program served about 20 people a year. And now we're actually bringing it down a little bit because we changed the model. So instead of just, hey, let's do something as a group, like Habitat for Humanity build, which is what we did the first year, we've decided to support all of the cohorts very intensively. So each person brings to life a community project in their respective area. This can be a park cleanup. Last year, one kid did a giant cleanup of Bushnell Park. Another person did a youth sports tournament to help raise money for scholarships. So something that can be done in a day, but is impactful. And then we're taking it to Acadia. So we work very intensively with each of the members. So now there's about 8 to 12 students that do that a year. And we're looking to grow. We pumped the brakes. We learned that I was wearing a lot of hats. And I think this is just good guidance for anybody in a founder's role or a leadership role. And you can only wear so many hats before one or two stop fitting. It just doesn't work. You have to be able to cell divide. You have to be able to delegate. And that was something that I learned in this journey. And part of our model was actually cell dividing me a bit. So I now hired a part-time, I would love to make her full-time eventually because she's amazing, but a part-time program manager that oversees our college and career success program. And then a super part-time program manager who oversees the Robert and Anthony Dudzik Memorial Fund to kind of help just carry out the work and really organize ourselves as a team. And now we did that about a year ago. And what's been so incredible is with this delegation, we're really at a place where we can actually grow. Like right now, we're looking to take on another 60 kids. I think we have a wait list of 50. And so we're working with the state right now to say, hey, how do we get some funding to get, these 50 kids with the staffer? And we're also launching a first year experience program at several of the Connecticut colleges that my program manager, Dr. Annabelle Hicks Gunther, and I are going to co-teach alongside faculty at the colleges to help even broaden beyond our cohort to say, hey, you may not work with us every week, but there's still kids that would benefit from our messaging. And that's what we're launching this fall, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
To answer your question, we've grown from 60 to between 60 and 80 across two programs, but we've delegated and restructured in a way that we're about to probably double the total size of who we reach in the next year, which is crazy.
How do you find the pipeline of young people into awareness of you guys, whether or not they end up working with you intensely or not? Is it a situation where you feel like you've gotten to where kind of every worker knows to do this? Or do you find that there are certain caseworkers that are always feeding you kids and others you never hear from? Not like you would know every caseworker, but what's the deal with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thankfully, this is one of the privileges of being in a very small state is when we say we're statewide, that obviously has to mean different in Connecticut than it would be in Texas because we're
impossible to do what you do in Texas, I think. Yeah.
100%.
We should have probably just stop and identify this for people. So if you are a listener and you're thinking of what we're talking about here and are like, oh yeah, there's some schools with something like what Chris is talking about on their campus, he went a different way. It's like one central program for a Connecticut that works with kids on lots of different campuses instead of having satellites. You still on that model.
100%. And that's where we're going to stay. I think the community model is so unique. I'm pretty confident. I would love to be proven wrong on this, but I'm pretty confident we're the only ones that operate like this.
I think so.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. And we're definitely the only ones that have lived experience at this level. Everyone has lived experience on our team except like one person, and over 50% of our board has lived experience. So it's very integrated in who we are. But to answer the question, we have really great relationships. And this work is so relational. And so the Department of Children and Families has two big umbrella staffers. So you have the post-adopt community, and then you have the extended foster care. So every single young person who is going to go to college that has post-adopt funding, Connecticut offers college funding for those who were adopted from foster care, and those who are entering extended foster care. Every single one of them has to have an approved post-secondary education plan. So they hear about us through that process. And then we realize that's not enough because you can't just say, okay, they're letting people know, but what does that mean? It's a brochure, it's a blip. Some young people are required through the state to work with us, but we tell students, it's up to you. Even if a young person comes to us like, yeah, my social worker is making me do this. I say, hey, I want you to know right now that if you don't want to do this, I will call the social worker, the supervisor, the commissioner, and say, this person does not need to do this because it has to come from the young person. It has to be their call. And I've yet to have somebody say, yes, I don't want to do this after that talk.
What is the quid pro quo that's implied there? You have to do Sun Scholars or we will not approve you to be in extended foster care?
No, not to that gravity. I think it's more or less if you want to be going to college, if you want that part of the funding, then you have to work with a resource.
Okay.
But that's not true. That's not a policy on paper anywhere. And so I'm the first one to say, yeah, would we benefit from that? Sure, because we'd have like more guaranteed students, but we already have students. We have a wait list of 50 kids right now. So for us, we're like, yeah, if you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here. You're your own person. You have a say in your life.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of referrals from social workers. Throughout the year, we have very good partnerships with the colleges. So each college does have a campus resource program now, which is really exciting. And so we work with all the leaders at the Connecticut, most of the Connecticut colleges that are engaging with our community and population. We work with a lot of social workers, other community nonprofits that oftentimes coexist in the space. Will go and, speak at their event. Like every year, the Connecticut Alliance of Foster and Adopted Families does this really cool event where high schoolers come together. They get prom dresses, suits. It's called Avenue of Dreams. And
Cool.
so we also do a workshop there because those high schoolers are future students.
For 2 decades, Fostering Families Today magazine has educated families raising and supporting children and youth in foster care. Delivered in print or online 6 times each year, Fostering Families Today gives families the latest tips, strategies, and research on caring for children with traumatic backgrounds. Use promo code PODCAST5 to save $5 on a print or digital subscription today. Just go to fosteringfamiliestoday.com/subscribe and enter PODCAST5 to save $5 on your subscription. That's fosteringfamiliestoday.com/subscribe.
I won't ask you to talk about the worst one, but is there a college that in Connecticut stands out to you as being particularly supportive of former foster youth on their campus?
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to lift 3 because they're all incredible, but
3. Okay.
I know it's so hard. Southern, Central, and Eastern Connecticut State University
Okay.
have really come together and they're working intersystem, where at Central you have an incredible person named Jessica Hernandez. At Southern, you have Sasha and Bernard. And at Eastern, you have this person named Christina. And they really work together and have done with a shoestring of resources. They really try to go above and beyond in working with the community. And those are 3 incredible schools. I'm sure there's some hidden gems out there that I'm not aware of, but those are 3 that really stick out to me that are they're fighting for year-round housing. They're making sure that if somebody is doing year-round housing, there's food access. They're really combining first-year experience work with this community because there's always an overlap in first generation, first year, and child welfare. Very few people, it is what it is. I'm certainly first generation. Few of us that grow up in foster care are coming from a family with bachelor's degrees. And so there's a big opportunity to fuse that early opportunity programming work, TRIO, the stuff you hear in Higher Ed Reauthorization Act. There's a subset of working with the child welfare community there. So those 3 do a really great job.
Cool. What is the biggest boost? Let's frame this question as obviously the first big break is getting a grant or contract. I'm not sure which from DCF to really start in earnest. Okay. So since we talked last, what would you say is the biggest boost that you guys have gotten to the work in the past 5 years? And what's been the biggest hurdle organizationally that you've had to overcome?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the greatest boost for sure has to be the Town Fair Tire Foundation. And I
name brands at discount prices, Town Fair Tire. Anybody in Connecticut knows that.
You can't escape them, but for good reason. Hey, I'm not a billboard for them, but I will say, if you go to a Town Fair Tire and you find the same price tire somewhere else, they'll match it. So they really are the cheapest tire you can get, and they're good quality. I use them. But one of the reasons I love them so much is they never asked me for that, because we've gotten opportunities for grants from organizations and businesses before that I've turned down because it felt very tokenizing. And that's not how they approached us. They reached out, their former CEO, who has unfortunately since passed, his name was Neil, just a really good-hearted human being. And he reached out, they connected with us because they sent a bunch of micro grants to child welfare organizations. And I was one of the few places that called up and said, hey, I just want to say thank you for this because we're really small. That was a time when it was just me and 2 other people. Right after our contract, but pretty early on, we were still going through our iterative process. And I think they realized pretty quickly, there was something special here. And I think they were shocked at how small we were. And so they brought us in. Neil did something that I will forever be appreciative of. And he said, hey, we want to give you some serious fundraising to help your mission because we want to make a difference in these young people's lives. But the catch is, or the condition rather, is that it's going to only be through matching dollars. So we'll donate $50,000, but you have to raise $50,000 and we'll match it. And that's since gone up. He passed away and they're dissolving the fund. So right now they're matching up to $100,000 for us, which is insane. But what it's done is it taught me how to fundraise. I did not know how to fundraise. I was lucky. I knew how to write contracts and I knew how to write policy and I knew how to show my heart is in this work, which is what got us, I think, our initial contract. But the world of grant writing, grassroots organizing, fundraising. You mentioned the marathon. We partner now with the Hartford Marathon Foundation. We're recruiting charity runners. So I can effectively say I run marathons for my job, which is cool. Not very fast, but it works. But none of that would have happened if it wasn't for the Talent for Retire Foundation, because they saw something in me. They saw something in Sun. They cared about this work and they taught me how to use these new tools. And I now know how to fundraise. I now know I can confidently go after grants. And that's why I can say, hey, yeah, I actually know for a fact, like this year, we're going to drastically expand our work because we're going to be in the classroom now on the colleges. We're going to be serving it like as in professor roles to do first year experience courses. I know that we're going to be building new staffers so we can work with more of our wait list. I would be so scared and insecure of doing this work 10 years ago. But now having these skills and yeah, I know how to chase funding. I know how to build this mission. So they were the biggest growth. The biggest obstacle is it's a double-edged thing. It's a blessing and an obstacle. Obviously, there's the pandemic because we went through that world event. I think artificial intelligence is one of the scariest and exciting things I'm seeing right now. Zach Laris from ChildWonk said something that helped calm my nerves a little bit about this. A few weeks ago at the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute was doing their advisory council. He's like, hey, sometimes we enter this space thinking that we have a say on whether or not AI is going to be used. And the fact of the matter is it's already being used, it's already being abused, and it's being used productively. So we have to figure out how do we want to guardrail it, to paraphrase him. He's a way better speaker than I am, so I probably didn't do his words too well. But it's been scary for me and exciting because AI abuse is rampant with college students right now. And it's has a compounding effect in my mind with our child welfare community because they're not engaging education critically all the time now. There's a way out, right? You can go on ChatGPT and say, hey, summarize this article. And what does that mean? What we're seeing is homework assignments are actually doing really well academically and test scores are dropping. Students are passing these grocery store list assignments, but they're not retaining knowledge. And what's the point of college if you're not retaining knowledge, especially in an area you want to work? If you want to be a police officer, you should probably remember the things you're learning in criminal justice. If you want to be a doctor, you probably should be remembering what you're learning in biology. And so learning how to use AI effectively to make sure you have the scope and the skills and the knowledge for it to actually be productive as opposed to being reductive. I use AI here and there. I think it can be really great, but you have to be able to already have the cognitive ability on whatever you're trying to apply it to. So that's one of the scary things that we're trying to navigate right now of, hey, it's already, Pandora's box has been cracked open. It's already out. So how do we now use it? How do we make sure that this is actually going to be helpful for the students? But that's one of my biggest concerns right now that I see.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense in this space. You mentioned COVID. That was definitely front and center when we talked because that was in January 2021. So that was peak season one of COVID, man. So that was the main thing going on with the kids in your orbit back then. We talked a lot about just how hard it was for them to get housing. We were talking about, I think you said like UConn was doing a really good job keeping kids in something, and there were other schools that were really struggling and all that stuff. Yeah. So that feels thankfully a little dated. I know that like at the core of your guys' program is the mentorship, but you do a lot of work to refer kids for their material and other needs that are not really part of Sun Scholars. What are those things now? What do you hear students in your cohorts need the most in terms of tangible assistance in their lives?
Yeah, it's one of those things where the storm is no longer a blizzard like it was in COVID, but it's still snowing. And COVID was wild. I felt like a chicken with their head cut off. We were still out there. We were not virtual in the pandemic. We were throwing masks on, meeting with students because I don't do this work for a paycheck. I do this because it's what I love. That's my heart. And we had students during the pandemic that were meeting with their social workers virtually. And then because of that, in extremely dangerous housing situations. And so for me, it's like, I can't turn a blind eye to that. So let's figure something out and let's solve this. So our work is primarily academic. That's the core goal, right? But if we're talking about college success and a kid is sleeping in a car, that has to become part of the conversation about whether or not they're going to be successful. I say that as someone who has slept in a car. It's very hard to care about school when your basic needs aren't met. So we do a lot of resource coordinating. We do a lot of partnership. To answer the question head on, the biggest areas that we see are still things like housing, food insecurity, and honestly, debt. I think that Connecticut it's always been in a pretty expensive state. It's compounded. So I don't know what it's like in the rest of the country when we're talking about affordability, but certainly Connecticut is rough because the pandemic had a very interesting landslide effect where lots of people came to Connecticut that were living and working in New York, Boston, even Philly, because we're a gateway state. We are effectively the escalator to three major cities. And so when people got to work virtually, a lot of them came to Connecticut, and it made the prices of homes and apartments
Skyrocket. Yeah.
skyrocket way above the rate of the national average. To give an idea, when my wife and I first met, we were living in apartments. I had an apartment in New Britain, and I was paying $1,200 for a 3-bedroom, 2-floor house.
Solid. Good deal.
Really good deal. My wife was living in Manchester, had a 1-bedroom apartment, was paying $1,600. That 1-bedroom apartment is now $3,000, and that 3-bedroom house is almost $4,000.
Oh my God.
The rent. That's more than
Wow.
my right. When you talk about things like Section 8 vouchers, which is the model that Connecticut uses for, all right, if we're going to provide a rent subsidy, they match whatever that is. Because it's very challenging to secure housing right now because the rate of price has just blown past what's the models that we use for giving out funding for these things.
Yeah.
It's a little crazy right now. And a lot of our students are carrying, I haven't studied this, so this is semi-anecdotal, but I'm seeing higher rates of credit card debt amongst our students. And that's not something that I felt was an issue 5 years ago. Something I necessarily saw as something that I was concerned by. It was always there, but it's very prevalent now where students have money going to collection. And now all of a sudden they're trying to pass their classes, but they have a debt collector auto withdrawing their money when they're working at a fast food restaurant or something. And that's stressful.
Yeah, I would imagine. Before I let you go, I didn't want to pass up on the opportunity to ask somebody on the front line really about what is going on up top, right? So we have federal policy and federal funds and federal programs that trickle down into what you do. One of the big ones is the Chafee Act, which has money for independent living. That's the majority of the Chafee money. There's also the education training vouchers, which are heretofore have been these $5,000 awards at a max that can help current and former foster youth afford going to college. And I expect that we'll see a meaningful effort to rewrite Chafee a little this year. If not, then next year. Just curious so I want to take you through a few things that are on the table, and then I would like to ask you for outside the box thinking. But there is already, I think these bills are going to start trickling in. One already has that would basically raise the award maximum to $12,000. Like I said, it's 5 now, so it's more than doubling that, and make this a reasonable effort to alert foster youth, which I think is actually a big deal if they can really put some teeth into that, because that's one of the most frustrating things in child welfare, that people don't know about it until it's too late. And then give this grace period for people who have struggled to get back in and not lose their Chafee support. What do you think of that bill? Is that the way you would go? How do you think about Chafee ETV policy as a guy on the front lines?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the cool thing is in Connecticut, we have a really generous state-funded program. So a lot of ETV is usually filling in rather niche gaps in the state. So if they don't complete their degree or they start it later before they truly age out, which in Connecticut, aging out begins at 21, but you can get a waiver up until 23 based on circumstances.
Okay.
So it's a pretty progressive state on that front. And in that, our extended foster care includes funding for college, housing, food, all state funded, up to about 25, 30,000 a year. So it's pretty progressive. A lot of our ETV dollars go towards 24, 25-year-olds, since the ETV goes up to 26, which I think is great and incredible. So I'm always for seeing this get expanded. I've been following it a little bit. I agree with you. I think the early alert is the key thing because so many people don't realize they have these benefits. My my always concern is how are they being administered, and then making sure that states are not cherry picking interpretations on how these go out, because obviously right now, this is one thing I would like to see change. This is one more, I think it's already on a good wavelength. I would like it to see, if it's not already part of this, if it is, I'm preaching to the choir. I would like it to be eligible for people attending part-time as well as full-time, because right now it's written for, hey, you need to be doing 12 credits or whatnot. And so you do see young people register for the 12 credits because then they get Chafee plus Pell Grant, and then just simply drop one or two because they just can't
keep up and do stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. They're paying rent, so they're working 40 hours, they're in school. And when you talk about taking 2 classes a semester, that's reasonable to get an associate's degree in 3 years. That's doable. So I would love to see that reform on it. That's my take.
I think it's a really interesting, like the award increase thing. It feels to me like that's going to really depend on the state that you're talking about. So like the way you're describing Connecticut, Chafee's like the ETV money might be like a kind of topper on a bigger program. But then there might be some states where that is the primary conduit of college aid to kids. And the thing that always comes up in these, because this isn't the first time there's been this proposal to increase the award amount. And it actually, I should say, during COVID, during the emergency, it did get raised.
Increase the pot too. I hope that's part of it.
So it's not. So what that means is that if you're doubling the award and you're actually fully subscribed, that's coming at a cost of how many youth could get it theoretically.
Yeah, I think that I get the good intention behind this. It's a common example of good intent with adverse implementation, because let's say you have the same people applying, you might actually just help a small group more significantly, but serve less.
Yeah.
And that's not always a bad model. I would actually say that's what we do. We say, hey, let's work with 45 to 60 people really intensively, as opposed to saying, let's work with 200 people that we meet with for half an hour Zoom sessions every other hour. So it's not to say that going a mile deep is a bad approach as opposed to an inch deep, mile wide.
Yeah.
I think it's a no-brainer that it just makes sense if you're going to expand ETV per person to expand the pot.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we'll see.
That's like their whole thing is what is ETV
Right.
is the only funding.
So alongside legislative proposals, late last year, before we all went away for the holidays, the Trump administration announced this executive order on foster care, which included a whole bunch of things. I welcome your thoughts on any of them. The one I wanted to ask you about was that it did single out, as the way that executive orders work, you're just telling your own people to do stuff. That's mostly what executive orders are. And one of the things they instructed was find ways to expand access for individuals transitioning out of foster care to short-term career-focused and credential awarding programs. In other words, potentially widen out the ETV eligibility, not to just these colleges, but to programs like that. I would assume from our previous conversation here, that's something you would get behind. Just basically, that's something that works. Yeah.
Yeah, I really think that this administration is actually doing a pretty solid job with child welfare. It's by solid job, you're seeing progress. You are seeing like good ideas coming out. I'm happy to see the First Lady's office going after and reforming the foster youth independence vouchers, because I think that was a great program with a pretty rough implementation. And so the fact that eyes are on it is good. My talking point to all of this is to say, it's great to fund child welfare. I say this as a foster youth. I say this as a former foster youth. I say this as a leader of an organization that would probably benefit from this program once it's implemented, the use of ETV funding or Chafee funding for nonprofits. And that's great. We also have to be mindful of, why does child welfare exist, right? And I do believe it will always have a place. I am not on the side of the fence. I actually think that the abolish child welfare argument is really goofy. But I will say that there's a stream that you can go up. And You can say, hey, if this happened better, would we have had family preservation? Would we have had, or reunification or kinship arrangement? Is there a better way to not need child welfare in the first place? And I do see trends from this administration, from the government right now, that have cut resources, or resources have become harder to access for people that are going to then potentially end up in child welfare. How are we impacting the demand in the first place for these resources? And I would like to believe in a world where I work myself out of a job. I would love to be worked out of a job. And I lead with that because I don't want to have a world where we have foster care, especially when it comes into a place where people are entering it because of neglect or perceived neglect, right? Where you're conflating poverty for something that is just simply a critical need that family is missing. You also have some really heinous people in this world that should not be around kids, as is evident in the millions of pages of files we've just seen from an island outside. There are bad people in this world. With that said, we know a lot of those who enter child welfare involvement is because of a lack of support and need, or systems that create the need. I've been public on this. My mom was a citizen. My dad was not. He had a student visa that was revoked due to geopolitics, and that led to his deportation when I was a year old. And so had we had a different system there, there's very likely a world where I would have never entered foster care. Or had I been placed with my US citizen family that just didn't speak English at the time. Instead, I was not, because there was a language barrier and prejudice. And so that was, in my mind, an example of government actually creating the need for child welfare.
Right.
I just hope that politicians today are being mindful of, yes, it's really great to support my community. Does my community need to be as big as it is? Maybe not. We're here and we're going to look out for each other. But I think there's another path too for the next generation to make sure that we have better outcomes for them with families. Yeah, that's my take on that.
Last question for you. Which one do you think is more likely, or what you, in your current state, because obviously things change over time, but like how you're thinking of it. So box one, Chris Baker Scott in 2040 is still the executive director of Sun Scholars, or you're on your third thing and Sun Scholars is still around. Which way do you think about it? Is this something you want to hand off and see success that way, or do you feel like this is what you're going to want to do the rest of your time professionally?
Yeah, I think I'm a lifer here.
You think you're a lifer?
Yeah. I would have to be hard pressed to leave. I love what I get to do, and I love that I get to grow with the agency. I love that I get to see that. When I started this, I always felt a little goofy as an executive director of an organization that had 2 staff. But now I feel very confident to say, yeah, I am an executive director of an organization that has 8 or 9 staff, and we're serving a whole state worth of people, making a difference. And so I look forward to seeing the role itself continue to mature, continue to grow. I feel very dedicated and committed to Connecticut, and I want to keep the work here for right now, because we work with a small slice of thousands of people that would benefit from our work. And this is where the love is. Maybe in the future, if some administration wanted to bring me into a children's bureau, I'd be interested in that. I think that would be really cool to take a pause to have an impact on national policy. But pending that, I love what I get to do. John, I don't make a lot of money doing this. I've had offers to make a lot more, and I've turned them down because I love this. For me, the impact is more important than almost anything else. And so that's where I'm at.
And I cheekily laughed off when you mentioned Texas, because I actually do think it would be very hard to do what you've built in a state that big. Totally makes sense to, like, Sun Scholars could just be a New England thing one day. That feels like doable, because every one of these states is not that big. Yeah.
I'm happy in New England. I think our states do have culture to them, and I love the New England world. Someone should start this in Texas. Someone should start their own agency. I don't need to be in Texas. There's already some really passionate Texan out there.
There are, actually, yeah. They do a pretty great, they have a very robust support system for tuition and support, yeah.
California has Guardian Scholars. New England has Sun Scholars. Texas has some really great resources. I think that's the joy of, like, our model being community. And it's that we've lived alongside and very much similar to the people we work with. When I go jogging, I will run by some of my students that are going and getting coffee in downtown Manchester. I have gotten beeped at by my students when I'm out there. So they see me at concerts. That's so cool, right? Like, how cool is that? Like, from a student perspective, to be like, this person with this whatever bougie title, like this executive is over there in the mosh pit, right? They're at church with me. They're like, I've seen students at my church. And I think that's really cool to live in that environment. I wouldn't want to be a million miles away from the people I serve.
All right, Chris Baker-Scott, founder, executive director of Sun Scholars. We'll see you in 5 years. Let's do this every 5 years. Thanks for joining us this time on the Imprint Weekly Podcast. Thanks to Christopher Baker-Scott, founder and executive director of Sun Scholars, Inc., for joining us today. And thanks to iFoster for sponsoring this episode of the Imprint Weekly Podcast. The Imprint Weekly Podcast is a production of the SafeCamp Audio Network, which is a division of Fostering Media Connections. Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web or at SafeCamp Audio on all major social media. This podcast is produced and mixed by Christine Anjoko, with music by Luke Giroux and Cyrus Elia. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you would consider subscribing or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts. And we would greatly appreciate if you would consider supporting our work here on the podcast and in print. Small donations from our listeners and readers go a long way towards helping us grow and cover more great stories in child welfare and youth justice. To support us, it is very easy. Just visit imprintnews.org/donate. You can follow The Imprint on Twitter and Facebook by searching the handle @TheImprintNews, and you can visit us on the web at imprintnews.org. You can always get over email at tips@imprintnews.org. I'm John Kelly, and we'll see you next week.